I always thought I was someone who had complete control over my life. But this damn city has a way of quietly draining the last bit of life out of you. Crazy car horns blast against my apartment windows every single night. Work notifications flash constantly from early morning until midnight. It gets so suffocating that some days I feel like my chest is going to burst from a lack of oxygen. That is why I built my own rule for survival. Whenever I hit my limit, I throw my phone into the glove box, turn off all GPS tracking, and head straight into the deep woods. This trip was a little different from the others. I brought my girlfriend, Emily, along with me. She had just gone through a severe mental breakdown from the toxic pressure of social media. I wanted to give her a real space to heal, a place completely free of cell service, loud noises, and judgment. With 5 years of backcountry camping experience, I was extremely confident in my survival skills. I knew how to pitch a tent against the wind, build a fire with damp wood, and read a paper map fluently. That confidence gave me a sense of absolute control over the situation. We chose the Delaware water gap as our weekend getaway. This place is about an hour-and-a-half drive from the edge of the nearest town. It was close enough to not worry about medical emergencies, but far enough to enjoy the isolation. We arrived a little after 1 in the afternoon. The weather in New England at that time was absolutely perfect. Golden sunlight cut through the ancient oak trees, creating a picture-perfect scene of peace. On our hike out to the campsite, we even ran into 2 groups of hikers. They gave us a friendly wave and wished us a great trip. Seeing other people created an incredibly strong, false sense of security. It made me completely drop my guard and believe these woods were entirely harmless. We picked a flat, open clearing hidden behind a large ridge of rocks to set up camp. The area was sheltered by massive old trees that would take 2 people to hug. It was so quiet that the only sounds were birds chirping and the wind rustling gently through the leaves. Everything was peaceful and predictable, exactly as I expected. I watched Emily flash a rare smile for the first time in months of depression as she helped me stretch the tent tarp. At that moment, my biggest concern was simply whether a thunderstorm would hit tonight. I had no idea that the safety boundary I drew for ourselves had actually been violated the very moment our wheels rolled into the edge of the woods. Everything started to change around 4 in the afternoon. At that moment, I was bending down, hammering the last tent stake into the damp ground. Emily was sitting on a rotting log a few steps away, casually flipping through her leather-bound book. Suddenly, a sharp, crisp snap echoed from the thick brush right behind my back. It wasn't the sound of a branch breaking on its own from decay. It sounded exactly like a heavy weight stepping hard on a dry oak branch. I immediately stood straight up, turned around, and focused all my attention toward the sound. There was absolutely no one in sight. Only a few wild rose bushes were shaking back and forth abnormally. The movement was distinct, even though there was absolutely no wind in the air. A cold chill ran down my spine, making me shudder slightly. The intuition of someone who often sleeps in the woods told me something was wrong, hiding in the shadows, but my rational mind immediately brushed that negative thought away a second later. I laughed at my own oversensitivity, blaming it on a ground squirrel or a white-tailed deer foraging late. I looked back at Emily and saw she was still absorbed in her book, so I didn't want to say anything to worry her. The feeling of being watched by an invisible pair of eyes began to take root in my chest. Still, the excitement of the trip quickly pushed that vague unease aside. About 30 minutes later, the muggy heat of the afternoon woods made us feel sticky and uncomfortable. I suggested to Emily that we find a cool water source nearby to wash off. We zipped the tent up securely and walked together along a narrow trail overgrown with weeds. After about 20 minutes of hiking, the sound of rushing water grew louder, leading us to a natural stream. The spot was tucked away behind large rock ridges and thick wild bushes, making it incredibly secluded. The stream water was crystal clear and ice-cold, letting us see straight down to the smooth pebbles on the bottom. Emily looked around and cheered with excitement. It had been so long since I last saw her this relaxed. Noticing that the surroundings were completely silent, with no other footprints, we decided to strip off our outer clothes and go for a swim. I picked up each shirt and pair of pants, carefully hanging all of our clothes on a low oak branch right by the bank. I intentionally smoothed out Emily's underwear and draped it right next to my jeans so they would dry quickly in the late afternoon sun. The cool water instantly washed away all the fatigue from our long trek. We soaked in the stream, talking and enjoying the rare peace of the wilderness. While Emily was tilting her head back to let the water wash over her hair, I suddenly heard a prolonged rustling sound. The noise came from the dense thicket directly across the stream, less than 30 feet from where we stood. The rustling sounded like something large was crawling flat against the ground, trying to squeeze into the leaves to avoid being seen. I narrowed my eyes and stared into the dark bushes for a good 30 seconds, but saw no further movement, thinking it was just a few small animals getting a drink. I went back to splashing around with Emily without suspicion. We washed up and enjoyed the spot for about 30 minutes, until the last rays of daylight began to fade completely. As the chill of the deep woods rolled in, I took Emily's hand and stepped onto the bank to get dressed, but the moment I looked up at that low oak branch, my entire body froze like I'd been hit by an electric shock. I rubbed my eyes and looked over and over again to make sure I wasn't seeing things. Emily's entire outfit, from her sundress down to the underwear she had just taken off, was gone without a trace. The branch where the clothes hung was eerily empty. The most terrifying and insane part was that my t-shirt and heavy jeans were still sitting perfectly intact in the exact same spot. They hadn't shifted or shown any signs of being touched by even a single centimeter. The wood's wind couldn't selectively blow away only a woman's clothes. Wild animals would absolutely never do something that bizarre. A flesh and blood person had been standing right next to us in the darkness of that brush. He had quietly reached up to the branch and stolen her underwear while we were splashing around in the water. Emily immediately fell into a state of absolute panic. She wrapped her arms around her shoulders, her body shaking violently in the chill of the evening setting over the woods. Her tears poured out, mixing with the water droplets from the stream that hadn't dried on her cheeks yet. I quickly ripped off my thick windbreaker and threw it over her to cover her body. I held Emily tight in my arms, desperately searching for any logical reason to calm her down. I pursed my lips and said, "Hey, look at me, maybe a small bear or some curious wild animal dragged the clothes away." But the moment those words left my mouth, I knew how stupid and ridiculous it sounded. My logic immediately shattered that lie. A wild animal would never select items so meticulously. It couldn't leave my thick jeans and t-shirt behind, only to take Emily's dress and underwear. A much darker and more disgusting thought was crawling through my mind. Unable to let Emily keep shivering, with barely any clothes on, I took her hand and walked around the stream bank to search. I hoped that bastard had just accidentally dropped something around here. After a few minutes of frantic searching among the rock crevices, we suddenly discovered a small trail hidden behind a thorny bush. The signs of crushed grass and broken branches were very fresh, with sap still oozing out. Someone had clearly just run through here only a few minutes ago. I squeezed Emily's hand tight, pulling her along that trail deeper into the thick brush. We walked for about 100 meters before entering a small, dark clearing sheltered by low-hanging leaves. Appearing before our eyes was an old, tattered, moss-green canvas tent. It was set up in an extremely makeshift way and hidden very discreetly to avoid the eyes of any hikers on the main trail. I told Emily to step back a few paces behind a ridge of rocks just in case. I bent down and picked up a large, heavy dry branch to defend myself. My heart pounded in my chest as I took each step closer to that empty tent. I raised the branch, using the tip of the stick to lift the tattered curtain at the tent entrance to check inside. Instantly, a smell of mold, the foul stench of an unwashed body, and household garbage blasted straight into my nose. It was so overpowering that it made me almost gag right on the spot. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light inside, a horrifying sight slammed right into my view. Hanging loosely from all corners of the tent and scattered across the filthy ground were dozens of women's underwear of all colors and styles. Some pieces were old, moldy, and smelly, proving they had been here for a very long time. I realized immediately that this bastard was a dangerous creep who stalked and hunted women in these woods. A few seconds later, the blood in my veins froze completely as I looked right at the center of that disgusting mess. Emily's freshly stolen light pink underwear was placed neatly and smoothly on top of a mud-caked pillow. Terrifying fear mixed with pure disgust surged so heavily that my hands shook. I didn't want to linger in this godforsaken place for a single second longer. I crouched down, snatched my girlfriend's clothes, and immediately backed away, pulling Emily's hand tight as we turned to flee as fast as we could back to the old trail. We had just run out onto the small trail when the sharp snap of a branch echoed right above our heads. The sound was so loud that it made both of us freeze like statues. Emily and I looked up at the fork of a massive old tree hanging right over that makeshift tent. My heart seemed to stop at the sight unfolding before my eyes. A gaunt man with a hollow face, wearing ragged clothes covered in mud, was perched up there. He sat completely still like a ghost among the dense foliage. His eyes were rolled back, staring unblinkingly straight at Emily. His face twitched repeatedly, before slowly stretching into a twisted, deformed grin full of primal malice. That look was absolutely not that of a normal human being. He slowly tilted his head to the side in an unnatural way. A wheezing sound came from his throat, and then he spoke in a raspy, hollow voice like the scraping of rotting wood. He uttered a sentence in a freezing tone. "It's still warm. I just finished smelling it." That disgusting sentence felt like a knife stabbing straight into the back of my neck. The blood in my body froze completely. I realized a horrifying truth, that he hadn't just accidentally picked up those clothes when we left. He had crawled right up behind our backs while the two of us were swimming in the stream. He had been hiding in the bushes, directly witnessing everything, lusting and waiting for the moment we dropped our guard to make his move. Pure terror instantly triggered the strongest survival instinct inside me. I tightly grabbed Emily's trembling hand and dragged her away like a madman. We ran for our lives through the thick, thorny bushes. Sharp thorns tore at our flesh, but the pain was nothing compared to the fear chasing us from behind. I didn't dare look back even once, terrified I would see that man leaping down from the tree. When we made it back to the main campsite, our expensive tent and all our personal belongings were still set up there. I didn't even think about packing anything up. I used all my strength to shove Emily into the passenger seat of the van and slammed the door shut. I jumped quickly into the driver's seat, jammed the key in, started the engine, and stomped on the gas. The engine roared, echoing through the entire corner of the forest. The vehicle sped straight out onto the main highway, leaving behind that land filled with darkness and sin. I slammed on the gas until I saw the bright neon lights of a gas station. Right off the highway, that was the first place we stopped after our frantic escape from the woods. I rushed inside to the counter and immediately called the park rangers and state police. About an hour later, 2 patrol officers arrived to take our statements. They looked at Emily, who was curled up in the corner of a seat, wrapped tightly in my jacket and trembling speechlessly. After hearing my story about the moss-green canvas tent and the freak in the tree, the 2 officers immediately headed into the woods to check the scene. They told us to stay at the gas station and wait for the results. Close to 3 in the morning, the patrol car returned. They confirmed they found the moss-green canvas tent hidden in the brush, exactly as I described. Inside, there were indeed dozens of pieces of women's underwear hanging everywhere. But that twisted man had completely vanished into the wild night. There was not a single trace left behind, except for that disgusting pile of clothes and the mud-caked pillow. The police also helped us gather our expensive tent and personal belongings left behind at the clearing. They handed everything back to me after a few days of paperwork, and physically, the danger seemed to be temporarily over. We returned to our safe apartment in the middle of the city, but the true peace in our souls had completely shattered. A secure home with a triple-locked door could no longer bring a sense of safety to Emily. She couldn't close her eyes to sleep unless the room was brightly lit. Every time a strong wind howled through the glass window panes, she would wake up in a panic and scream in despair. I wasn't doing any better myself. Now, every time I catch a whiff of damp wood rising from a potted plant, or the smell of rotting leaves after a rain shower, my entire body shudders. Every single pore tightens, and goosebumps break out across my skin involuntarily. The most horrifying obsession isn't what happened, but what is still ongoing. I know that gaunt man with the twisted, mud-caked smile is still out there, completely free. He is still hiding somewhere beneath the dense oak canopy of another forest. He is patiently perched on a high tree branch, staring unblinkingly with his eyes rolled back, waiting for his next victims to drop their guard. Most of us have a very naive habit when we use online marketplaces like Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. We always believe we can judge how safe a person is based on just a few polite text messages. But the reality is that you are opening your door and inviting a complete stranger into your home with zero verification. Just a little carelessness and a small compromise can turn your safe haven into a deadly trap. What happened to me 3 years ago in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio is the absolute proof of that. It was a terrifying night when a single wrong decision almost cost me and my best friend our lives. At the time, my college best friend Ryan and I were preparing to move out of our rental house. It was an isolated place sitting right against the edge of the woods. The neighborhood was incredibly remote, with sparse houses and almost no streetlights at night. Our lease was expiring at the end of the month and both of us were completely broke. We desperately needed to clear out all the furniture on time to get our security deposit back from the landlord. We had an old oak dining set left in the house that was extremely heavy and bulky. We did not want to haul it to our new place. I decided to list it on Craigslist for an incredibly cheap price, just to get rid of it fast. The sole purpose was to make some quick cash to pay for the moving truck we had scheduled for the next morning. Ryan and I had been roommates for years, so we knew each other inside out and trusted each other completely. Around 9 p.m., while the two of us were taping up the last few cardboard boxes, my phone buzzed. An account named David messaged me about the dining set and desperately begged to come pick it up tonight. He explained that he had just finished a late shift at a nearby mechanic shop and had to travel out of town for work tomorrow. He mentioned he had his own pickup truck and could haul it himself if we agreed to meet around 10 p.m. I looked out the window into the pitch-black darkness, swallowing the dirt road leading to our house. My gut instinct instantly started screaming. I felt that letting a complete stranger into the house this late in such an isolated area was way too risky. I turned to Ryan and told him I wanted to turn this David guy down and tell him to come tomorrow morning instead. But Ryan immediately brushed it off and urged me to agree because of the tight deadline with the moving truck. He said David had promised to throw in a generous amount of extra cash for the late-night inconvenience. Ryan leaned in and said in a reassuring voice, "Come on, man. We really need that cash for tomorrow. Plus, there are two of us here. What is there to be afraid of?" The financial pressure combined with Ryan's reassurance made me waver. I gave in, nodded, and sent our address to David through the app. That was my very first concession. It was a fatal mistake that opened the door for a predator to walk right into our private space. Right at 10 o'clock, the heavy roar of an engine echoed from right out in the front yard. I peeked through the blinds and saw an old, rusty, dull gray pickup truck idling with its headlights completely killed. A tall, lanky man stepped out of the cab. He was wearing a black hoodie pulled tight over his head, keeping his face angled straight down toward the ground. He moved with incredibly slow, heavy steps, dragging his feet across the gravel. Ryan took the initiative to open the door, stepping out into the yard to greet him and break the suffocating tension. The man didn't say a word, only offering a sharp, awkward nod in response. When he walked inside, he didn't even glance at the old oak dining set sitting right in the middle of the living room. Instead, his eyes darted around, staring deep into the two dark hallways that led to the back of the house. Ryan stepped closer, intending to give him a hand with the heavy table. Instantly, the man snapped his head around and glared directly into Ryan's eyes. He growled in a low, ice-cold voice, "Back off, I can do it myself." The air in the room instantly froze, leaving both me and Ryan completely stunned and shaken. But a second later, he abruptly let out a low, guttural chuckle and waved his hand. He shifted his tone as if he were joking. "Just kidding, I'm plenty strong." That rapid, erratic shift in his mood sent a shiver straight down my spine. Without waiting for our reaction, he walked past us straight into the open kitchen in the back. He grabbed a glass from the shelf and ran the faucet to get a drink without even asking for permission. This rude behavior completely crossed social boundaries and made me incredibly uncomfortable. Ryan leaned over and whispered that the guy was probably just a weirdo lacking basic social skills. We decided to just bite the bullet and deal with it, so he would load the furniture and leave. After hauling the first chair out to the truck bed, he walked back into the living room. He stood by the doorway and mentioned he needed to use the restroom at the end of the dark hallway. About 10 minutes passed, but I didn't hear a toilet flush or a single footstep. The hallway area was dead silent, to a terrifying degree, as if nobody was even down there. I quietly crept toward the corner of the dark hallway to check on things. From inside the unlit, empty spare room right next to the bathroom, I caught a strange sound. The man was standing perfectly still in the pitch black, whispering a continuous stream of nonsensical words. His flat, chilling voice kept repeating over and over like a broken radio. Goosebumps broke out all over my body. So I hurried back to the living room, grabbed Ryan's arm, and signaled him to just endure it until the job was done. Waiting way too long without seeing the man come back out, Ryan started to lose his patience. He decided to walk down the dark hallway to urge him to quickly wrap up the deal. But right as he stepped past the corner, Ryan stopped dead in his tracks before a horrifying sight. The door to my bedroom was standing wide open. The man wasn't in the restroom at all like he had claimed. He was standing completely still, right by the edge of my bed, his back turned, staring intently down under the bed. The faint light spilling from the living room was just enough for Ryan to spot something terrifying in his hand. He was holding a long, shiny metal object that looked like a large switchblade. The second he heard the hardwood floor creak under Ryan's feet, he quickly slipped the knife into his black jacket pocket. He didn't even turn his head. Keeping that same rigid, frozen posture, Ryan backed away step by step toward the living room, his face completely drained of color. Our vague fear of a weirdo instantly transformed into a clear realization of an imminent physical threat. Seeing the sheer panic on Ryan's face, I knew the situation had completely spiraled out of control. Not wanting to tip him off that we knew about the weapon, we immediately retreated into Ryan's bedroom. That was the room with the sturdiest lock on the inside of the entire house. I gently pushed the lock into place, trying not to make even the slightest sound. From inside the pitch-black room, we held our breath, listening intently to the outside. The guy's heavy footsteps began to move slowly out of my bedroom. He walked out into the living room and discovered that both of us were gone. Instead of calling out for us, he suddenly started whistling a broken, incredibly eerie melody. He wandered through every corner of the isolated house, as if enjoying a game of hide-and-seek. The thud of his soles against the wooden floor grew clearer by the second, heading straight for us. Then the footsteps abruptly stopped right in front of Ryan's bedroom door. A suffocating silence hung over the space for a few agonizing seconds. Suddenly, there was a chilling sound of metal lightly scratching against the wood of the door. Right after that, a flat, emotionless whisper came through the crack. "I know you two are hiding in here." My heart felt like it was jumping out of my chest, and the two of us stood frozen like statues, not daring to breathe. After a few minutes of standing there menacingly, he turned around and walked toward the back door. The sound of the back door being pushed open and then slammed shut heavily echoed through the house. Ryan quietly crept over and peeked through the small window facing the backyard. He saw the tall, lanky silhouette of the man pacing around, hidden beneath the old pine trees. He hadn't left yet. He was scouting the perimeter to find another way in. Ryan was in utter panic, wanting us to immediately open the door and bolt straight for the front exit to escape. But I gripped Ryan's shoulder tightly, because I suddenly remembered a fatal detail. My car keys were still sitting right on the dining table out in the living room. If we rushed outside empty-handed into the freezing winter night, we wouldn't stand a chance of survival. I shakingly pulled out my phone to call the police, but the screen showed absolutely zero service. In this remote, mountainous area, losing cell signal was a regular occurrence. All hopes of outside rescue were completely crushed. Our silent argument was cut short by a sound coming from the back door. The heavy footsteps from the backyard suddenly returned at a very fast pace. Right after that, the sound of the back door latch being violently pried open echoed eerily once again. The intruder had returned inside the house. This time he was no longer pretending to whistle or moving slowly. His heavy footsteps pounded against the wooden floor very fast and purposefully. He was rushing straight toward the bedroom door where we were hiding. The next second, the doorknob began to twist violently. The rattling sound of metal echoed continuously in the tight, dark space. The man outside was throwing all his weight into trying to burst the locked door open. The pressure from the outside was so intense that the wooden door latch began to creak. Ryan and I immediately threw ourselves against it, pressing our entire body weight into the door. Our feet dug hard into the floor, sweat pouring down despite the freezing cold. "Hold it, don't let go," Ryan hissed through his teeth in sheer panic. The bedroom, which was supposed to be our safest haven, had now completely inverted its function. It turned into a deadly trap where we were separated from danger by just a thin, cracking layer of wood. Right at the peak of that suffocating moment, my phone screen on the table suddenly lit up. It seemed like a weak bar of signal had just reconnected for a brief instant. A new message notification from the Craigslist app popped up on the lock screen. I glanced over, and my entire body instantly froze because of the text displayed on it. The message was from the actual account of the real David. "I am so sorry. My truck just blew a tire on the highway about 20 miles away from your place. I'm sitting here waiting for a tow truck to change the tire, so it'll probably take me 40 minutes to get to your house. Hope you understand, and please hold that oak dining set for me." That text message felt like a bucket of ice water poured straight into my soul in the middle of the winter night. The horrifying truth was finally dragged into the light. The man standing outside, violently banging on the door and growling right behind us, was not a buyer at all. He was an imposter, a dangerous predator who had somehow obtained our address. Every single red flag, from the moment he stepped out of his truck, instantly clicked together in a terrifying way. The ambiguity vanished, replaced by the confirmation that we were facing an armed criminal with clear murderous intent. The sound of splitting wood right behind us snapped me back to the brutal reality. The door lock had started to give way and couldn't hold out any longer. Knowing that staying put meant certain death, I quickly signaled Ryan to look toward the window. It was a small glass window facing the narrow, thorny path on the side of the house. I gently unlatched and pushed the window open, letting the freezing wind blast into the room. I shoved Ryan out first and quickly scrambled after him. Squeezing my body through the tight frame, we accepted leaving behind all our cash, IDs, and my own car parked in the front yard. The exact second my feet touched the thin layer of snow outside, a loud crash echoed from inside the room. The wooden door had been completely busted down by the man. Without a second thought, Ryan and I bolted frantically into the pitch-black, freezing night. We trampled through briars that tore at our skin, sprinting through the thin woods toward the main road. Throughout that frantic escape, neither of us dared to look back even once. We were terrified of seeing that tall, lanky silhouette chasing right behind us with a knife. Our initial carelessness had completely collapsed, leaving a heavy psychological toll. The close friendship between Ryan and me was forever haunted by that life-or-death moment. We just kept running frantically through the freezing dark night, never daring to look back. After sprinting for nearly 2 miles until we were completely exhausted, we finally reached a 24-hour gas station by the highway. The night clerk saw the two of us in a tattered, panicked state, got incredibly spooked, and immediately helped us call the county police. About 15 minutes later, armed police officers raided our rental house to investigate. But the mysterious man and his rusty pickup truck had completely vanished without leaving a single trace. The next day, we returned to the house to pack up the rest of our belongings under strict police escort. Ryan and I immediately deleted our Craigslist accounts, blocked all related contact methods, and moved directly into a high-security apartment in the city center. Our physical safety was temporarily restored thanks to the geographical distance and strict personal security. But our peace of mind was gone forever. After an update from the police a week later, they called us and revealed a spine-chilling detail found during a thorough search of the old house. The police discovered an old smartphone with no SIM card hidden deep under my bed. That phone was set to record audio continuously, and it had been running for a full 2 hours before we managed to escape through the window. That discovery made my entire body go cold, and a series of unanswered questions has haunted my mind ever since. What on earth was that man's true motive that night? Was he simply trying to sneak in to rob us? Or was he actually a serial killer hunting prey on online marketplace apps? And the most terrifying part is how he knew the exact time of the transaction to show up and pretend to be David before the real buyer even arrived. Had he been silently monitoring my account, or had he already been stalking the perimeter of our isolated house for days? The story has ended, but the absolute dread still lingers in my everyday life. Even now, whenever I hear the chime of a marketplace app notification, my body shudders involuntarily. I always find myself wondering if the person standing behind that screen is the same man in the black hoodie from that night. About 6 months ago, my father passed away. I'm not saying this to get any sympathy or pity from anyone. Honestly, our relationship was never good. He wasn't a bad man. He just didn't know how to be a real father to me. Ever since I was a little kid, I knew I was nothing like him. I knew I would never turn into the person he wanted me to be, and I know that always aided him. His passing put an end to a very distant relationship, but it somehow left me with an unexpected obligation. I was completely caught off guard when I found out he left me his cabin in his will. My friends told me this was just his way of playing one last joke on me, but I didn't see it that way. I knew he understood I would just flip the place and sell it, and I think that's exactly what he wanted. After handling some tedious paperwork, I was told that before listing it, I needed to go up there, deep clean it, and do some basic repairs. So I used that as an excuse to stay at the cabin one final time. It was my way of facing the past and saying a proper goodbye to my dad. The cabin sat deep inside a thick, remote forest. It was completely isolated, dead quiet, and miles away from the nearest neighbor. When I first stepped inside, the cabin looked exactly how I remembered it from the past. The gross, worn-out couches and dusty bookshelves were identical to what lived in my memories from when I was 10 years old. That strange familiarity instantly gave me a false sense of security. However, that feeling was quickly shattered when I noticed a horrific stench filling the entire space. The smell was incredibly strong, carrying the heavy, toxic odor of rotten death. I knew for a fact my father didn't pass away inside this cabin. In truth, he hadn't even visited this place for over a year before he closed his eyes for the last time. While I was busy deep cleaning the ground floor, the central air and ventilation system suddenly started making strange noises. They were distinct rustling and scratching sounds echoing from deep inside the metal air ducts. I froze instantly and rationalized that maybe wild mice or squirrels had crawled in there to nest while the cabin was vacant. I deliberately ignored that unusual sign to keep pushing through my heavy cleaning workload. It's just a few wild animals, nothing to panic about. I muttered to myself out loud just to break the bone-chilling silence of the cabin. Once night fully fell, I put my clean sheets on my father's old bed and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, those strange noises started up yet again. The frequency of the sounds began to rapidly increase, no longer sounding like the minor scratching of small rodents. It was clearly a heavy, rhythmic movement right above the ceiling. At the same time, a draft carrying a foul odor blew out from the vents located near the floor in the hallway. That smell was a sickening mix of long accumulated body sweat and old cigarettes to maintain some baseline of calm. I desperately clung to the theory that a dead animal was trapped inside this unmaintained ventilation system. The next morning, I woke up feeling completely exhausted. When I walked into the kitchen, I noticed that a few empty food wrappers on the table had been moved. I remembered exactly where I had piled them last night, but now they were scattered around. Suspicion started to creep in. So I walked down the dark hallway to check the air conditioning unit. The thick layer of dust on the metal vent cover at the end of the hall had been completely disturbed. It looked like someone had gripped it from the inside and pulled hard. Right then, a loud, heavy sound echoed from deep within the air duct, making me jump. The initial scratching had turned into a heavy, slow crawling sound. It sounded like a massive object dragging itself across the sheet metal panels. "You're just being paranoid. It's definitely just a wild animal trapped in the vents." I kept talking out loud to myself, desperately trying to feel like everything was still under control, but that self-delusion didn't last very long. Late in the afternoon, while I was standing in the hallway getting ready to pack up my things, the house went dead silent. From the large vent near the floor, I suddenly caught a faint, muffled, murmuring sound. I held my breath and leaned down closer to the vent to get a better listen. It absolutely wasn't the growling or whimpering of a wild animal. It was clearly the low, raspy whisper of a human voice. My blood ran cold, and my entire reality flipped upside down in a split second. The threat here was a flesh and blood creep, not some freak incident of nature. Every single detail from the past 2 days instantly clicked together in my head. The horrific stench, the heavy dragging sounds above the ceiling, and the moved food wrappers in the kitchen. Everything was being caused by a stranger hiding right inside this house. A wave of pure terror completely took over my mind. I was paralyzed by the realization that I had been living, eating, and sleeping right under this guy's eyes for the past 2 days. He had been watching me from the darkness of those air ducts, and I had absolutely no clue. I didn't care about cleaning or fixing up this cabin anymore. I didn't even want to satisfy my curiosity to find out who was inside the system. My only goal right now was pure survival, and I needed to get out of here immediately. I bolted back into the bedroom, grabbed my phone and my car keys off the table. Any emotional connection or closure I wanted with my late father at this cabin was completely gone. Just as I gripped my keys tightly and rushed into the hallway to run for the front door, the entire power grid of the cabin overloaded and completely shut down. Thick darkness instantly fell, swallowing everything. At that exact moment, the crawling sound inside the air duct suddenly became fast and wildly aggressive. That thing was no longer moving slowly. He was rushing straight toward the large floor vent right in front of me. The metal duct rattled violently, thumping right next to my feet. My whole body was shaking as I scrambled to turn on my phone's flashlight and aimed it directly at the metal vent slats. The beam of white light cut through the iron bars, shining directly on the gaunt, filthy, and ash-gray face of a strange man. He was curled up inside the tight air duct, staring right back at me with wide, distorted eyes completely stripped of humanity. Ah! I let out a blood-curdling shriek in absolute horror. I spun around, sprinted like mad toward the front door, threw it open and dove into my car. I started the engine, threw it in reverse, and slammed on the gas, desperately backing out of the pitch-black forest road that led to the cabin. I drove like a maniac to the local police station in a state of utter panic, catching my breath as I reported everything to them. When the armed police units moved in and stormed the cabin, they discovered that the man had been using the place as a squatter haven for a very long time. The police explained that since my father had left the cabin vacant for an entire year before he died, the guy had pried open an outdoor access panel to crawl into the ventilation system and live there day by day. It turned out that the horrific stench I smelled the second I arrived wasn't from a dead animal. It was the smell of trash, empty food wrappers, waste, and over a year's worth of his own filth accumulated inside those air ducts. I immediately canceled all my plans to clean the place myself and decided I would never take another step inside that cabin ever again. The haunting memory of those wide eyes staring from the deep darkness of the vents keeps catching me off guard. Now, every single time I hear my own air conditioning system kick on at home, my heart starts racing. The baseline sense of security in my own living space was completely shattered after that horrific night. I hired a professional cleaning service to clean the whole place out without even telling them a single thing. They got rid of absolutely everything inside the cabin, just like I asked. Then, I sold the cabin, as is just to get rid of it as fast as possible. What was supposed to be a trip to say goodbye to my late father ended up leaving me cold and detached. It didn't bring me any of the emotional closure or healing I had originally hoped for. By the time the local police showed up at the scene that night, the strange man was already gone. He had quickly fled into the vast, pitch-black expanse of the remote forest. To this very day, I have no other information about who the man was, where he came from, or where he went. I also have no clue if he is currently lurking inside the ventilation system of some other house. I can only hope that whoever owns that cabin now is as happy as my father used to be in that place. And I sincerely hope they never have to deal with the surprise visitor that I did.